Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 68, Getting Angry About COVID, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Matt.
I want to talk today about something that has been in my mind a lot over the last probably a couple of weeks, but really longer than that. But I suppose it's really surfaced a lot more in the last couple of weeks. And that's it's an emotion that I've had. And the emotion is I've been really angry, I've got to say. And anger that's created because of what we're experiencing in Australia and in the world around COVID and around the way that our governments are actually making decisions that are actually having large impact upon the people in our community. And, I don't want this podcast to be about, who's right and wrong in relation to the decisions that they're actually making. But I do want to talk about the fact that the decisions that people make that are outside of our control are having significant impact upon the community in which we live. And that becomes very difficult to navigate through. And, I sort of wear multiple hats in my life, as most people do. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a business owner, I'm a leader of people. Deal with the community. There's lots of different things that I have to do and want to do, probably more to the point than have to do. But some of the things that I'm seeing at the moment become really difficult to unsee and really difficult to navigate through. And I'm starting to get more and more angry with what I'm seeing with regards to the impact that these decisions are being made by government on business owners and mental health in our community and our children in relation to, not having the experiences they should have as children at school and in socially and those sorts of things. So massive impact. And, it can be as extreme as having to deal with a business owner that's suicided that I have to deal with, through to, children that are obviously not having as greater experience and having to deal with some mental health issues there, through to people just not being able to go on holidays, which is obviously on the minor end of the spectrum. But just the whole thing around the powerlessness of it, that these people are making decisions on our behalf. And the thing that angers me the most is that they're not necessarily listening and making very, I think, informed decisions as to and decisions with an open mind. And I've been really, really quite angry about it. And I just wanted to chat about that today, and how you deal with it is probably the more to the point.
Yes, I've been watching that in you with interest and curiosity, I would say. I think the most important thing that we're talking about here is really, what do you do when you feel powerless about something that you actually care about? Because if you felt powerful, you wouldn't feel angry. And I'm drawing attention to this because people often feel anger is a kind of power, but in a way, you've expressed it very well. The anger is there because you don't know what to do. You feel like people are not listening. You don't have an obvious path to go and make a difference in this. If you did, I don't think you'd bother being angry. You would go and do the thing you need to do, and hopefully it would make a difference. So it's really important to recognize that when we feel angry about something, there is a powerlessness that sits beneath that. Because once you acknowledge the powerlessness, then you start to be able to find your power again. If you pretend that anger is power, usually it doesn't go very far, and it tends to make a lot of mess. When you start expressing your anger everywhere, you end up having to apologize to lots of people. You have to clean up the mess after you. So I'm really, really in favor of people finding their power rather than getting lost in a kind of false power, which is being able to shout.
It's interesting because we spoke about suppression of emotion in a recent podcast, and parking our emotion. And typically, as a business owner, I've parked my emotions a lot of the time. But the experience of this anger and this powerlessness you're talking about happens in business on a daily basis. So I suppose it surfaced to the top a lot more because the stakes that we're playing at the moment are on a national, global level where it's impacting upon, millions and millions of people and billions of people, as opposed to in my business, I might be only impacting on the hundreds of thousands of people, so to speak. So therefore, the stakes are a lot higher. So in the past, I've probably been able to manage that powerlessness that you're talking about and that emotion a lot better than when I see the stakes being higher.
Well,
And
also
so,
when it's in your own business, I think that even if you can feel powerlessness, you feel more powerful. But when it's not even only national, if it was just national or just your state, you might feel a bit more powerful. But when you see the same thing going on globally, it makes us feel very small, actually. It's like, well, what difference can I make when I'm seeing the same thing happening in Canada and America and the UK? And then I know stuff going on in other countries maybe that I don't know so much about. Those are the countries maybe we hear most about. And then we feel so small and so inadequate.
it's true, but I actually feel that even in my own business over the years as well, about the fact that there's so many things that are outside your control that you feel powerless about. That people are making decisions, or they're impacting upon you a certain particular way that you actually have no control over, because of the way the court systems work or the legal system work or their authorities work, in terms
Laws.
of laws and those sorts of things that you actually have to abide by, that you may not necessarily there'll be unintended consequences that you get caught up on. And so I do feel it from the global, but I also very feel it from a micro perspective. But then you spoke about state. I mean, I live in the state of Victoria, and we're renowned for lockdowns in Australia, and that's been quite difficult, and to the point where, as much as I probably have some voice here, I feel like I still have no voice, even though I've started to exercise that voice on a larger scale. But it's amazing on how little you feel, like you said, how powerless you feel when nobody listens to you, or you feel like nobody's listening. And then you speak to somebody, say, "Oh yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, we're listening to you," but you know full well their actions are not actually doing that. And that's when you feel, I've felt really, really, and you can probably hear from the emotion that I'm talking about today. I've been really struggling with it, I've got to say, in terms of this powerlessness that's going on.
Well, the thing that comes to me most strongly as I listen to you, and I think back to the conversation we had about parking emotions, and I think about all the emotions that I've been through over the last year, because I just probably got to that place a lot earlier than you did, in terms of feeling pretty emotional about things that I was seeing happening. The principle that comes to me that I think we need to explore over and over again in this context is, how do we step up or expand or kind of rise up, uplift, because all the possibilities that where we kind of devolve rather than evolve are absolutely not the answer. It's really clear to me that every time we feel that anger or frustration or disappointment or hurt, like sometimes I just feel hurt at what I see. I can't, it's like, this isn't the world that I thought that I grew up in. This isn't, I hear so many people recently saying, I don't recognize my own country. I cannot believe, and you're one of them, this is not the country that I've known my whole life. And not only from this country, I hear that in other countries as well. It's very strong in America, of people really feeling the loss of their culture and their values and what they stand for. UK, Canada again. I'm a little less familiar with some of the European countries. And so we feel this loss of something that has been a very powerful presence in our lives, often without us even realizing it. But the thing that's clear to me is that we always need to look at, how does this create an opportunity for evolution rather than devolution? Because if we devolve into getting more and more angry or more and more powerless, that doesn't spell out a good story either for us as individuals or, I think, for us as humanity.
So whenever I get in a situation where I feel a bit powerless, or feel like, things are I'm being dictated to by whatever else is going around, the thing that makes me feel better is that I'll go and do something about it. So I'll actually go and do an activity or a thing. So when you talk about expansiveness, is that kind of really what you're talking about?
Absolutely, because doing something about it, A, it gives you power, B, it gives you a place to channel the energy, because in a way the anger is there's a whole lot of energy there, and it expresses as anger because it hasn't got anywhere to go. So it's just like, blah, just an explosion all over the place. But if you actually manage to channel that energy into some kind of action, you're using the power that's there for something positive. So yes, that's absolutely, to me, something that is a kind of evolutionary impulse rather than a devolutionary impulse. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's something that makes you stronger rather than weaker.
I like the concept that you spoke about energy. And so anger is actually energy. You can feel it, when you're angry about something, you can actually feel the energy running through you. And as you say, if you've got nowhere to channel that energy, then it doesn't do anything other than just remains with you, which I don't think is actually a great feeling.
It just hurts you.
It does. And so I like this concept of saying where you're channeling the energy, you're channeling the anger into something. That doesn't mean you're angry about it. It doesn't mean you're just going to, as you say, spew all over the place in terms of the way you go about it. But just having the ability to point that energy into a direction that you feel that makes you feel better just by doing that. But then the activity you're doing, hopefully to reduce the level of powerlessness that you have, to also to help you. So there's kind of a double whammy there, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that's so fascinating, and I think particularly in the COVID situation, is that pretty much every individual that I've come across feels that sense of powerlessness. And I think what it's waking up in us gradually is the fact that if we want to create really positive change, we can't do it on our own. Most of us grew up, even quite young people, I think, grew up with a certain kind of lonely hero mentality of a kind of, I'm the one who has to save things. Our heroes were people like Nelson Mandela. Now, for sure, he was part of a whole big thing, but it was always about him. It was always about Martin Luther King. It was always about Gandhi. These great examples. And history is full of, the Napoleons and the Wellingtons and the, I don't know, I did European history, obviously. Every country has their own heroes, but it's always some lonely guy who looks like he did the whole thing on his own. And then you've got the few, Florence Nightingale dropped in there to remind us that there are women in the world too, who also did it completely on her own, apparently. It's like, so we have these very strong archetypes of what it is to save the day or stand up for values or something like that. And I think that's very daunting in a situation like this. Whatever your values are and whatever you want to stand up for, this is kind of values agnostic in a sense. But what I see waking up in me, and I think in other people, is the fact that two things. One is that every little thing you do creates a little ripple effect, and you don't really know what that's going to be. So you can think, and I can think sometimes doing this is completely pointless. It's just far too small. But I've noticed that doing those things rather than not doing them creates ripples that come back at a certain point, and they connect with other people. And that's the other piece, is how do we connect with other people? And what happens if we keep doing the little things and then suddenly we find we're part of a bigger movement that's not an old-fashioned movement of people shouting and demonstrating, but is a much more evolved, much wiser kind of movement, which is taking us in a direction, to me, which is really important, of wisdom, of consciousness, of goodness, of people really thinking about what's important here, what's valuable, what's really, what do we need to take care of in this situation?
And one of the things that, obviously we've spoken a lot about this because it's been a topic that you and I have spoken about privately, is around, what can you do with it? And for me, business is the key. It really is, to actually be able to do something in business as a movement, because business is a community. It's a collective. It is, I can start using statistical data like it represents 47% of the GDP of the country. So you look at that and you go, well, it is a sum of togetherness. And when you start to think about that, you go, okay, well, I'm not alone anymore. There's a lot of other people in that same situation. And what we'll then tend to do is work inside that community to help strengthen and build it and support it. So that little ripple hopefully can create a bigger movement in terms of that sort of stuff. But there's days when you feel like no matter what you do, you feel still very small and powerless when you're going through that process and that principle.
Honestly, if I didn't have my business and know that I'm training people to be strong and training them to find genuine inner freedom and liberation so that they can navigate really challenging times and they can always find solutions for any problem, it doesn't matter what it is. If I didn't have that every single day, I don't know what I would have done with this last year, because I think I've probably experienced more a kind of, at times, like despair or like, what on earth, what's happening? And, you know, that relates to my personal values, which are very much about natural health and well-being and freedom and people being really responsible for their own health. So, but as I said, this conversation, it doesn't matter whether you agree with my values or not. What matters is that we really dig into our own values and look at how we share them with our community. But honestly, there have been moments when I've looked at it and I've thought, oh my goodness, it's the first time ever in my life that I've actually felt unsure whether I wanted to come back again for another life. I always kind of had this idea, like, it'll be really cool to come back in the future. And there've been a few times when I've thought, you know what, maybe I'd rather go somewhere else. And I never expected to feel that. And it's my business every single day, and the fact that I know that what I'm doing is a direct answer, that I'm creating a better future and helping people to create a better future for themselves. That's what keeps me on track, because otherwise, you know, it's so easy to get lost in thoughts that they don't take me anywhere.
Yeah, and this is a thing that we do have a business that we can express ourselves and we can do something about. And I think we should celebrate that too also as business owners, is the fact that we do have a vehicle and a channel that may not be open to us if we're actually working for a larger organization, because it's a lot more difficult to change the landscape and the narrative and voice of a bigger business compared to the ones that we operate, which are smaller by nature. So therefore you have a larger and a bigger voice. And I think that we should really recognize that the voice we have is a lot bigger and a lot stronger than what we sometimes give ourselves credit for, because we have this feeling, I think, that, oh, we're a small business, you know, and, you know, you have a small number of people, I'd have, you know, a larger number of people, but I still represent, in my own mind, a small business. But yet I think as a collective, and if we all feel the same way and get going in the same direction, we're going to have so much more power. And it's good to have this conversation, just because it feels like I'm doing something about hopefully sparking some interest in people too, or some thoughts in people where they go, yeah, I actually feel the same way, and what am I going to do about it, or how can I help, or what movement can we put together? And not, as you say, in the old-fashioned way of placards and protests and banging on walls and stuff like that, but actually, you know, doing something in a responsible way that we have more control over, which I think business can really have a massive influence on how we actually go forward in this particular world, that should have a lot more power than the decisions that the governments are making.
That's why I think it's so tough that so many businesses are being closed down. The only thing I hope is that it's caused the business owners to really, really, really think about what they can contribute, because that's what business owners do. There's one thing I just want to drop in here, because I think this is important. Like, it's easier for me in a way because my business is so directly related. I teach people. I have a lot of power in my business to do things that can connect very directly, and people can come and ask questions, sorts of questions we're raising today. They can ask in the sessions that I have with my clients. And I think it's easy sometimes for people who run businesses that you might think of as more mainstream, To think, well, I just do this, whatever it is, it's some product or some service. But I just was thinking about, that there was this little business where I used to live he was a printer, but I didn't have a printer, and so I always used to do my printing down at his business. And I was thinking about the fact that you and I have had tax planning conversations in the last couple of weeks that relate to my business or my businesses, and that through the way that we all connect with each other and serve each other in the business community, we're all lifting up each other. And some people are more in the front line, like I'm in the front line in terms of creativity of a new future, because that's where I choose to hang out. But I can't do that without all the other businesses that do all the other things. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge all the businesses, and especially everyone who really cares. People who care about the future, who care about each other, who care about quality of life for themselves and for the people who work with them and for their clients, because those are the things that we can see are so important.
And you're right, it breaks my heart as a business advisor and in business, and that's probably why I'm so angry, to be quite honest, around the closure of businesses because of the decisions that are being made by governments to lock states down and those sorts of things. And that's probably why I'm reasonably emotional about it too, because I'm part of that community, and the voices are starting to get taken away. And so we are trying to be there as a community to support each other, but it is very difficult in these particular times. And we don't know what the future is going to hold in terms of, are these people going to come back? What's the livelihood for these people? Are they going to go and get jobs, or are they going to go and create new businesses, or what's going to happen? So there's a high degree of uncertainty, which is also fueling this feeling of hopelessness as well.
Yeah, and I've seen people recently, there are people in my community who maybe 6 months ago were sending me emails saying, "Hey Sarah, have you seen this? This is really interesting." And then I get emails now saying, I'm losing hope. I can't stand this any longer. Something's happened. They say something's happened to me, Sarah, and I'm not the person who I was before. And that breaks my heart. It's just so awful to see that happening to people. I've seen people just saying, this has been going on for too long. I've been locked up for too long, and I'm doing everything that I've learnt to do. And they're remarkable, I think, in the way that they do handle the situation. But it's too much.
It is, and I think that we have to recognise that as much as anything, and probably, well, hopefully, the people that do have the capacity to continue on and support other people and build that community again, because a strong business community is going to be the way out of all of this, as far as I'm concerned. And so whatever we can all do as a collective community to support the businesses to come back and to flourish again like they were before is hugely important, and to support the people's mental health through this, because I think that word hope, we spoke about hopelessness, which is driving the anger. The opposite of that is being hopeful, and that really is the only way to start to get that positivity back. Well, we're hopeful that this is going to change or get better. So,
or otherwise, the other thing is, I think that we need, for me, what I find is that there needs to be something stronger than hope as well, because the problem with hope is good, but hopes can be dashed. And we've seen that. You must have experienced that in Victoria, and I'm seeing that, like, they've just locked down in the UK again for another month or something, I heard, and that's just before the summer holiday period, and I can imagine what people are feeling. And so there's been a lot of hope spun over the year about what's going to happen, and then it hasn't happened, and then again it hasn't happened. So my feeling is that we actually need to build in ourselves and in people around us something much stronger. I think that we have to have a spirit that is so strong that it doesn't matter what gets thrown at us, we're stronger than that. And we can find new ways of responding to situations, because I don't think the old ways are working very well anymore. And that out of this, our spirit becomes so strong that this kind of thing would never be dealt with in the same way again, because it wouldn't be allowed, because we know that there are better ways of dealing with it. Whichever side of the fence or the many fences you sit on, there are better ways of doing it than this.
Digging deep into that resilience is something that we obviously have to do, and as business owners we have to do constantly, because there's always things that get thrown at us, and you just hope that people are able to dig into that, strong resilience to be able to keep going, as you say, because that's really all you can do. You can only just keep showing up and presenting and still being hopeful of that things are going to get better or turn around, because you've got to be optimistic about it, because if you're not, then so there's an element of that. You've got to be hopeful that you're going to get through it and things are going to be okay, and you'll find it. But then also, as you say, when things aren't feeling that hopeful, to be able to dig deep and have that resilience there to ensure that you can continue on to do what you have to do and find different ways. Because you're right, the things that we've been taught in the past are not enough, I don't think, to get us through some of these really hard times right now.
One of the things I will say is that I've developed more strength from this situation than anything that I've ever faced in my life before. And I haven't had to deal with anything really hard, except the sheer fact of looking at the situation, of being a part of it, because we all are. But I find more and more that I take on information, especially some of the really challenging information, and it's almost like I eat it, and instead of it becoming something that's like toxic for me, it becomes a source of strength. It's like I will not let anything, it doesn't matter what you throw out, it doesn't matter what terrible things might be going on or what stories are presented to me, every single one of those will make me stronger, not weaker. And that's a big shift that I've experienced in the last year. I don't think I ever had cause to before.
I think that's a really good point too, because when you digest information, you can either be fearful or you can not be, okay? And so therefore, that's exactly what you're talking about. You either use it as a motivation to spur you on from a strength perspective, or you can be really frightened about it and retract back. And I think that's really the key, is to actually look at it and go, well, I can either be fearful of this particular situation and be uncertain and feel hopeless and feel negative, and the choice comes in, or I can go, you know what, I can actually take this and be really quite powerful with it as well, and use it to spur me on to actually change things. Now, this is choice, and sometimes it's easy to say, look, you just choose to be happy or you choose to be strong compared to being weak, which is a very difficult thing to put into place and into action. But I think if we actually recognize that in these really hard times, you go, well, I can choose to either be really scared about this, or I can use it as an inner strength to go, you know what, I'm not going to accept the status quo. And the thing I love about business owners, the thing that actually motivates me as to why I serve the community, is because I do call them plainclothes rebels, as you've heard me talk about before, that they look like, the run-of-the-mill people on a daily basis, but they've got a rebel inside them. They've got this burning desire to do things differently. They won't accept mediocrity. They won't accept the status quo. They actually dig deep and they'll find different ways, and they're resilient. So that's why I think that, the business community is one of the most resilient, and that's why I'm really hopeful that really the business community becomes the pathway out. And it's going to take that strength and determination that got you into business and kept you in business to hopefully will maintain it or go back into it again. And that's what, hopefully, if nothing else, I'm hoping, and by putting it out there in this podcast, I'm hoping that people sort of go, you know what, I'm going to go hard and really double down and fight hard to support the rest of the community that I feel that I'm a part of.
It's kind of the backbone, really, especially small business is kind of like the backbone of society. You know what I'm thinking? The thing about fear that we need to understand is that when we come from fear, or when we talk about things and make people afraid, we actually cause negative things to happen. You can make somebody sick by getting them to be afraid of the symptoms. We actually knew that before COVID. We knew that people could be given a diagnosis which they didn't even have. We actually know there's been case studies of people who died of a diagnosis of a disease that they didn't have. So they died from the news, literally. And we've seen a lot, I think, of that in the last year. When we talk about those kinds of things, we start to create negative realities. And the flip side of that is that as we start to talk a better future into place, that's what starts to happen. And I think that that's the power of business owners, is that they can, first of all, talk a better future, and then they can take action in alignment with their talk, and they can engage and enroll other people in it, because that's what they do all the time. They enroll other people in their ideas. That's what business is all about. And actually change the world in a tangible way by the very spirit that took you into business and has got you to wherever you are so far. So yes, I agree with you, absolutely. To me, business is the way forward because it touches everybody in the community.
Yeah. It is the foundation of this podcast, which is the spirit of business, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And this is like the essence of it in this particular topic.
It is indeed. Well, Sarah, I'm sure that we could talk about this for a very long time. But it's been good because it's just, I think it's just a topic that it's good to just discuss. Even if we don't have strong answers or solutions, it's just good to get it out there and have conversations about it and keep people focused and positive and supportive of, and know that they are part of something that's bigger than themselves, which hopefully then also gives them some strength to continue on.
And we know that hundreds of people listen to this every week. We don't know where that might be shared, but some of you might share it with somebody else. And who knows what's going to happen with that? You never know where anything's going to reach. So again, to do something rather than to do nothing, that gives you power.
It does. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.